We're here at a pioneer cemetery that we spotted yesterday on the way to Gearhart off the 101. I'm Jim Dewar from the Astoria Christian Church. Glad you found us this morning. We chose to film Easter Sunday morning, Resurrection Sunday, in a graveyard. Pioneer cemetery, these stones, hundreds of years old, a lot of them you can't even read. Pretty cool. Friday we asked the question, who's really in charge? Remember the sea lions? Yesterday, Saturday, we talked about the in-between day. Waiting. How hard that must have been. Today we have Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday. And something got released into the world, and it's still out there. It hasn't been eliminated yet. A unique aspect of Christianity is the fact that we trace our origins, unlike all the other faith movements that are out there. We can trace our beginnings to a single moment in history. Judaism can't do that. Buddhism can't do that. Atheism, most of the other isms, there's not a single moment in history when they came into existence. One day there was no church. Next day, there was the church. So what happened that first Easter Sunday? In Matthew's account, the women find the empty tomb. An angel tells them that Jesus is risen. The angel says, go and tell his disciples. And then they encounter the risen Christ. They don't even recognize him. And he says to them, greetings. A little anticlimactic, don't you think? I mean, the women are confused. They're crushed. They find the stone rolled away. There's a bright light all around them. And Jesus' next words are profound. His whole ministry has been leading up to this post-resurrection encounter with his followers. And all he says, greetings. Like, what's up, dude? It's like you see your best friend in Walmart. Hey, what's up? It's almost as if Jesus is saying, told ya. Nah. Well, he probably didn't say that, but that's what's going on. This is completely anticlimactic. It's pretty cool. Sunday changed everything. But maybe not the way that you think it did. For a lot of people today, Easter is a very comforting story that says spring is coming. Life is going to get better. The flowers are popping out of the ground. Life is eternal. Everything's going to get good. But there was none of that optimism found in that first Easter. No, if you look at that first Easter story closely, what got released more than anything else? Get ready for it. Fear. There was more fear after the resurrection than before. John Ortberg says that nowhere does Jesus or the angels say you don't have to worry about dying anymore. That wasn't their message. The angel's message, Jesus' message, there's work to be done. I mean, the very next recorded words of Jesus, in Matthew's account anyway, and they all differ a little bit, but the very next recorded words of Jesus after he says, hey, what's up? Is what we know as the Great Commission. Now go and tell everyone that I'm alive. We read an awful lot in between. He's saying my enemies failed. The cross didn't stop me. My movement's going to go on. It's as if he were saying, my Father has vindicated my message of forgiving your enemies, as if my Father has vindicated my teaching of suffering and dying for the sake of love. And now my enemies are going to be really ticked because it's not just me. Now they got to deal with all of you. I'm sending you out into the world with a world-changing message that transformation into the character of me/God is possible. On Sunday, their lives didn't get easier. They didn't get safer. The first followers of Jesus' lives got a lot more dangerous. And guess what? When you accept the risen Jesus Christ, your life doesn't get safer. Your life gets a lot more dangerous. Comfort did not get released that Sunday morning, nor really did assurance about life after death. The ancient world had a lot of different beliefs about what happens when you die, a lot of different opinions. Just like today, some people said that when you die, your life is snuffed out like a candle. One ancient tombstone said, I was not, I was, I am, I don't care. I know a lot of people that kind of have that worldview today. I don't understand it. I don't find it hopeful. I couldn't live without having some assurance of what was beyond the grave, but some people do, and that works for them. Others believed in a place called Hades, which was kind of like a shadowy, dark, scary place where the departed spirits go, unable to return to earth. So these disembodied spirits come back sometimes as ghosts and doing all sorts of mischief and things like that. Now the Jews believed in resurrection. They believed that God would one day heal and redeem his people, and he would establish justice, and he would end suffering, and he would restore the righteous dead back to life. Everyone would get a great big mulligan. There'd be a second chance at that resurrection. It would be dramatic, and it would be obvious, and it would be undeniable, and it would be on a mass scale. All God's children would be resurrected at once, and history would end. No Jew would have ever dared to think that one person had been resurrected in the middle of history, because they knew these questions would be next. Is disease eradicated? Has justice broken out? Is suffering done away with? It's nonsense to suggest such a thing, that if one person rose from the dead, then those things needed to occur alongside with that. It would be as if George Washington had claimed victory over the British, and yet King George still controlled the colonies. No, not at all. You see, resurrection to the Jews was like square dancing or football. It was a team sport. And either everyone goes or nobody goes. So this Jesus rising from the dead as an individual, it was a hard pill for them to swallow. And then when you realize that the early church and the early church leaders and the early church writers of what we know as the New Testament were all Jews, something very significant must have happened to change that worldview of the resurrection. And it was very significant, yes. Even though his followers believed that he was the Messiah, and even though Jesus had predicted his death several times during his 3.5 years with his followers, when it happened, none of his followers claimed that everything was going according to plan. On Friday, when Jesus died on that cross, it's not like they looked at their watches and said, right on time, man. This is exactly how things were going to pan out. This is fantastic. No, not at all. All four of the Gospels present a very unflattering picture of the disciples, especially the apostles. These men that we hold up as pillars of the faith, and they are. They're great men. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes when we read the Bible, we miss the humanity of the great Bible heroes, and we paint them with halos, and they would be the first ones to say, "Get that halo off from top of my head." Let me tell you how scared I was. I can't wait, when we get to heaven, if that's one of the things we get to do, to talk with these guys about what it was like way back then. But they were confused, and they were panicked, and they were disappointed, and they were running for cover. Man, they were scared to death, literally scared to death. And then suddenly they weren't. What changes a person from completely scared to death to, I will die for this man? It was an empty tomb. They saw an empty tomb, which told them that the sightings of Jesus were not hallucinations. They saw him alive. They saw the risen Lord themselves, which meant his body had not been snatched, as the Jewish leaders had paid the soldiers to make as their cover story. And they remembered what Jesus had said. Jesus said in John 12, verses 23 through 25, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds." He went on to say, "The man who loves his life will lose it, while the man who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life." Jesus gave teachings like that, and it just went right over his followers' heads. They nodded, like a lot of us do at church on Sunday mornings. Preacher says something we completely don't understand, but nice sermon, preacher. Don't have a clue what that was all about. That's how the early disciples were with Jesus. He'd say stuff like that. They're like, "Oh, he's so deep. He's so profound." Yeah. What's it mean? I don't know. They're clueless. And again, we know they were clueless because when he died, they didn't stand around waiting for the resurrection. They're like, it's over. I love this resurrection stuff. I love funerals. Some of you don't understand that, and maybe it's a preacher thing, but I've been at this for 40 years. And I kind of joke I prefer funerals over weddings because the people stay dead. I guess that's preacher humor. But there's truth to that, and let me explain that a little bit. I love funerals not because of the lump that gets in your throat and you can't talk, and the tears that come involuntarily and the snot that bubbles out of your nose. I don't love funerals for the grief. I hate grief. In fact, I hate death. I think God hates death. I know he does. What I love about funerals is the opportunity to preach this message right here. And quite often to a crowd of people that maybe have never considered it, depending on what their background is, because all sorts of people go to funerals that would never go to a church service. And I love talking about the risen Jesus Christ and the hope that is now available to every single human being because of Easter. That's what the early followers of Jesus were going to get to. And they would write about it in the epistles that would come later that we know as the New Testament. But right now, Easter Sunday morning, they're scared and they're confused. Something something big has happened. John Ortberg's preaching professor was a guy named Ian Pitt Watson. And he talked in his class that there were only two great revolutions in human history that changed the course of human life irreversibly. He says the first revolution was when someone started to farm. Until then, human beings were hunter-gatherers. They lived day to day. They moved from place to place. There was really no such thing as home. And then someone noticed that if they dropped a seed into the ground and walked away, something happened. Something in the soil called out to the seed and said, "Hey, little seed, send me down some roots." And something above the seed said, "Hey, little seed, send me up some shoots." And things started to grow. And the seed would become a plant or a tree. And it would produce fruit and achieve its destiny. But that could never happen unless the seed died first. To deliberately throw away something that looked edible seemed quite foolish. But someone did, and then life happened, and no longer would humans have to live day to day. There would be villages and towns and crafts and art and architecture and tools and civilization and science and chemistry and studies. There would be home. And Ian said that all human civilization is built on this one observation: unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains a solitary grain of wheat. But if it dies, it will have a rich harvest. History has long lost the identity of that first revolutionary. But we know the name of the second. We know where he lived. We know what he taught. We know how he died. Jesus said this is the way that life works. You have to be willing to sacrifice something. If anything's ever going to be the way it's supposed to be. No sacrifice, no harvest. And he said, I'm not only talking about seeds, I'm talking about you. Wow. And he wasn't just talking about your physical death. We're all going to die. He said, while you're still alive, something dies within you. And I use that phenomenon to create much fruit. That's powerful stuff. What got released that first Easter Sunday was hope. Not just hope of a better life, your best life now. Not even just hope that there's life after death. No, what got released was a hope that called people to die, to selfishness and sin and fear and greed. Die to the lesser life of a lesser self so that a greater self might be born and reborn. And many people did. I think of Romans chapter 6. There's what happens at our baptism. Buried with Christ. But I came out of that water. Guess what? I wasn't dead. So what died? The old me. And hopefully if you've had that experience, the old you. And then Paul will go on to say, now because this has happened as a result of your faith and your obedience, live out that truth and please Christ. Let him transform. I said this yesterday. I'll say it again. I told you. You're going to hear me say it a million times. The only thing God's ever wanted, Old Testament and New Testament, is a people who, say it with me now, reflect his character. He's not interested in the religious stuff we do. He's not interested in the candles and the recited prayers and the beads and all that stuff that human beings have said is so important. No, hear me well. He's interested in transforming you from the inside out, transforming me from the inside out. And the only word he could use to describe it is dying to self. Now, as we come to the end of our little talk today, I think it's only appropriate to talk about some tombstones. John Ortberg said, I think of the change Jesus brought to the world around hope when I think about two tombstones. He said, one of them marks the resting place of Mel Blanc, the famous voice of countless characters in Looney Tune cartoons. In accordance with his instructions, his family inscribed as his final epitaph the words that he had said to end 1,000 cartoons. That's all, folks. And then he said the other tombstone is described by Philip Yancey, and it marks the grave of a friend's grandmother who lies buried under the ancient oak trees in a cemetery of an Episcopal church in rural Louisiana. And in accordance with her wishes, the only word that's inscribed on the tombstone is waiting. Just up the hill behind me, Kim spotted a little bit ago a tombstone from someone from Nova Scotia, which is kind of cool because I wanted to end our time today by telling you a little story. It was probably 30 years ago, around 1990. I was doing a revival, I think, at a little church in the Bay of Fundy up in New Brunswick, Canada, the Canadian Maritimes. And the preacher and I drove out, just driving around one day, and he wanted to show me, or we stumbled across a pioneer cemetery, much smaller than this one. Actually, it was just maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. I think it had an old rusty wrought iron fence. Couldn't even read the tombstones. And with the water lapping just feet away of the tide coming in from the Bay of Fundy, the two of us just stood there in holy awe. And I don't know if he said it to me or if I said it to him, but one of us looked at the other and said, "We're standing on a launch pad." And I got chills. And I got chills just now. My friends, Jesus Christ came on Easter Sunday to launch you not just into eternity in heaven, but to put to death those parts of your life that are not pleasing to God, that are hurtful to you and to those you love and to those that love you, and to say there's a better way to live. There's fruit that God, your Creator, wants to produce in your life, but something's got to die first. And the hope of Easter is that when that something dies, the goodwill of God will be formed and take root and show forth in your life. And He will get the glory that He made you for.